I'm Beth Montgomery, and joining me today is Jim Skolaski. Today is May 12th, 2009. Thank you so much, Jim, for being here with us today to share your memories. We really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.
Jim, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up, when you were born?
I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, and I lived there until I was 12, and then we moved to a small town, northern Wisconsin, Rhinelander, which was a resort town and paper mill napkin factory. Then I graduated from high school there in 1950, and I went to Florida, and I found out I was getting drafted, so I joined the Navy in 1950, and then I stationed at Patuxent River Naval Air Station, and that's how I ended up in Maryland.
Jim, can you tell us a little bit more about how your family came to be in the United States?
My father's father came from Eastern Germany, and they, although they were Polish, they all spoke German. And they came over in the late 1800s, and they lived up and around the Grand Rapids, Wisconsin area. My mother's father snuck into the United States from Ireland, and he settled in St. Louis, Missouri. And then in 1898, he swore allegiance to the United States and forego his allegiance to the Queen of England. And then my mother moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where she and my father were married. And her mother died in childbirth, and she went through school in Michigan, and Carmichael, I think it is, Nuns. And that's where she went to school and graduated from. And how she met my father, I have no idea.
Well,
So, and she lived till she was 92, and my father died at 88.
well, Jim, can you share with us a little bit about the experiences you had growing up in Wisconsin? What type of activities did you do as a child?
Well, we played a lot of football. We played very little baseball. We used to take cardboard and slide down these steep hills like on a sled. And we played, hide and seek at night and croquet, things like that. And they had lived in a small neighborhood where they had like 10 houses, and they had a playground there where you could go, and they had summer events and everything like that. So it was fairly nice.
And how did you stay up to date on the news and things that were going on?
Well, we listened to the radio all the time. It's the only thing we had at that time, or read the newspaper. And especially during the war years, I followed Ernie Pyle and his war correspondent, his articles, and my father would hear something on the news, and he had a whistle that he'd blow, want me to come and hear it, so to see what's going on in the war.
What are some of your fondest childhood memories?
Oh, I guess my father was a baker by trade, and all the kids in the neighborhood used to come up and love to get chocolate eclairs and donuts and things like that. And I never ate that stuff. And then it made you feel good to see that, want them come up there and get food. They'd come up and take the dog for a walk in order to get the donuts. At that time, there was a lot of unemployment, because you're talking about, late 30s, early 40s. And hobos used to stop, and my mother would have milk and donuts for them. And he enjoyed talking to these different people that came along, and so it was just rather, I guess, dull child, but we never thought anything about it. We seemed to enjoy life. Okay.
And how did you go from Wisconsin to coming to where you are today here in Carroll County?
Well, when I got out of the Navy and I went to the University of Baltimore for 1 year, and because of the GI Bill, the little bit of money they gave you, I couldn't afford it. So I had to get a day job and go to school at night. So I got a job with Lyde Chemicals. Well, through this Lyde Chemical company, I met my wife, who worked for Union Carbide. And so I had asked her one time for a date, and she said no, and I come up and meet her mother and her father, and I said sure. So, and at that time I lived in Glen Burnie, and you didn't have the Beltway then. And I thought, how can I pick a girl that lived out nowhere? Because I thought I'd never get to Eldersburg.
And
So
how long did you and your wife, how long have you lived here in Carroll County?
we've lived here since 1969.
And can you tell me a little bit about the property that you and your mother had?
Well, it was my mother-in-law. It was it belonged to her father-in-law, and we were walking one Sunday, and we were over on this high ridge, and it was a nice view, and I said, "Boy, this would be a nice place to build a house." So she said, "Well, if they ever put a road through here or anything like that," she said, "you build here, I'll give you the property." So eventually they put 97 through there. Then they had to put Benrose Lane in as an access road to the property. So that's when she gave me an acre of ground and do it. Then I found out last year that I built illegally.
Oh, wow.
That the Carroll County approved it, and they shouldn't have. The health department approved it, but the zoning department shouldn't because it's in a conservation zone. And in a conservation zone, you have to build on 3 acres. So after 40 years, they tell me I got an illegal house.
And you brought a picture today that you wanted to share with us.
Yes, it was a picture of the fields and property before they built 97.
Can you tell us a little bit about the picture that you brought with you today?
This is a picture of the property looking east across 97, which was not there at the time. Down this way south is what is Barthlow Road. And when they built 97, they had to put a road in here called Benrose Lane. And it's maintained and worked by the state. It's a state-owned road. And they entered it at the end of my property because the people that own the farms down there didn't want to keep using them, so they just abandoned them. And eventually the state bought that property and turned it into a state park.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us
You're welcome.
today. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like for you and your family growing up here in Carroll County, since you pretty much raised your children here in Carroll County? Just tell me a little bit about the lifestyle that was here.
Well, being that I had lived in the country anyway, the last 8 years before I left the state, it was similar to what I had. In the land around here, landscape, is very familiar to certain parts of Wisconsin, or very much like the landscape in Wisconsin. So I was used to living in the country, so it wasn't a hard transfer for me to move up here. And of course, my wife had lived up here since she was 12, so it was an easy adjustment. I think the hardest part was that I don't particularly like to drive, and then I ended up having to drive 45 miles a day to work one way. But we've always enjoyed it. I've got 2 children who live here in Carroll County, so and they like it. They don't want to move away.
And what were some of the activities you guys did as a family growing up here?
We used to go out and pick a lot of wild berries in season. You got blackberries and raspberries and wild strawberries. We'd take walks down through the parks and the woods and everything like that. The kids like to see deer and wildlife. And we used to play a lot of croquet. We had a lot of family picnics with on most holidays at my place with friends and family. And we played a lot of card games, board games, things like that. And my children, when they were little, loved to be read to. So that's kind of the atmosphere they were brought up in.
Were there any favorite spots for you to go to visit for food or treats?
Well, at the time that we moved up here for the kids, you almost had to go to Baltimore for anything special because there were no drive-ins up here or anything like that. The only thing you had for entertainment, you had the theater up on Main Street, and you had the drive-in theater. Well, there was one over on 32, and I can't remember what the name of that was, but there was also one up there where the Westminster High School is now. So occasionally we'd go to those drive-ins, and we would occasionally go bowling when they had the bowling alley up there in Westminster. Of course, that burnt down. They don't have it anymore. So, my older son was involved in sports in high school, so, we would go to sporting events. And I had several friends that were in drum and bugle corps, so we used to go down to Memorial Stadium and see those, in season, things like that. So we'd taken trips to Gettysburg and Washington and places like that. We'd go to Wisconsin for a couple of weeks every year.
Now let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in Carroll County over the years that you've lived here?
Well, when I moved up to Ellersburg, or up to here, when you got to Ellersburg, the only thing you had was Poplet's Liquor Store, which was on a corner of 32 and 26, and then there was a little sandwich shop next to that. Across the street was an Exxon station then, but at that time it was called Esso. Down the street from that, going towards Baltimore, you had a Masonic Lodge. Other than that, there was nothing on either side of the road, all the way down to Randallstown. Up on 32, and 32, aside from Bennett Road, that road's the same as it was 40 years ago. Same thing with 32 going south. It's except for where they widen it from Ellersburg down to Piney Ridge Parkway. It's the same two-lane road when we moved up here 40 years ago. So they really haven't improved it too much. And they widened from 32, 26 down to the Baltimore County line a little bit. And then from 32 down 26 down to White Rock Road, they widened it a little bit there. But other than that, they're the same as they were 40 years ago. They really haven't changed a lot.
Now, what can you tell me a little bit about the community here in Carroll County? How are your neighbors?
Well, I don't have any neighbors.
Okay.
So that's one of the strange things. And now the kids eventually had friends that lived up there in Presidential Park, which, like I told you earlier, they resented them building all those houses up there after they lived up here a few years, after they finally adjusted to the fact that they were country kids, So, it's just unreal the way it's changed up here. The traffic and everything is just, no matter where you go, it's unbelievable.
Are there any stories that you would like to share? If your grandchildren were to look at this video that we're doing here today, is there anything that you'd want to share with them about Carroll County?
Well, I think that it's one of the nicer counties, and they have a good educational system, and I think people are interested in what children do up here. I think because of the fact that it's changed a little bit, and the fact is you got a lot of some of these kids coming out of the city and moving up here, and I'm talking about 16, 17-year-olds. You have a lot of accidents with them because they're not used to driving roads like these are up here, curvy and hilly. And my kids are familiar with all that, so and they realize it, and they say things, make comments about things like that. So, my son lives down here in Ellersburg, and he's very active in the Methodist Church there on St. John's Road there. And my daughter and her husband, they own a business down here in Ellersburg, an auto repair shop. And and I've got another son who lives over in Edgewood. But other than that, I think they just enjoy this country atmosphere, even though it's built up a lot over the years.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your memories.
You're welcome.
And for giving us great perspective on how things have really changed over the years.
Okay.